Hi folks, Robert Lowell Goller here. Thanks for joining us for the weekly chat about local history. Appreciate the support of the project. I had another idea planned for today. I actually try to plan things a little ahead, but with all the chat and talk and controversy about President Trump's tariffs that are occurring right now, last few days actually, and this is called Local History Live, but I'm sure by the time you even watch, a lot of you watch later, things might have changed even further, and things are going back and forth. But as I was talking to some folks about the tariffs, and we were discussing a little bit about the politics, and of course, I want to know, I bring up the history of tariffs and context of what's happening in today's, putting today's news in historical context. And I've been talking to some people who own small businesses. I have several friends who own small businesses, and they're concerned because even if some of their products aren't made overseas or outside of the country, the materials used to produce those products may be made in a country that's now going to have a tariff placed upon it by President Trump. And I was curious, you're hearing in the news a lot about previous tariffs, particularly the McKinley tariffs. President McKinley, Donald Trump is bringing him up quite a bit, and when talking about the tariffs. So I thought this had the concern today in small business, and you're hearing it on the news, and it is true that this thing that's happening in Washington, you're hearing on the news a lot about the relationship with other countries, international relationships, and how these tariffs are causing issues with that, our interaction as a country with other countries around the world. But I noticed the news is starting to talk to small business owners on main streets in small towns like our own East Aurora here, but in small towns across the country, of how these tariffs might impact the toy store on a small town main street, a five and dime one we have here in East Aurora. I was talking to some friends of mine, and that same concern was coming up with among them as to what the tariff, once the effects of it start to occur, how it'll impact business. They'll have to raise prices, all of that you're hearing on the news. And I thought, well, we've had previous tariffs, and out of curiosity, I said to myself, I'm going to quickly look into previous, in newspaper articles, do a search through the newspapers to see how, if any, the impact of previous tariffs on East Aurora, and by extension, small towns across the country. So I did a simple digital search for tariff through the East Aurora Advertiser and in other newspapers. And what I found is that this is going to take a lot more research. And I'm definitely going to write about this, because I don't think this tariff topic is going to go away anytime soon. But long story short, real quick, is that tariffs have been a bone of contention, have been a controversy, have been a topic of discussion for a very long time. It seems to crop up every few years in election cycles. And throughout the history of the East Aurora Advertiser, you have periods where the term tariff comes up quite a bit. And one of the most prominent are those McKinley tariffs that President Trump has talked about, and they did come up in the East Aurora Advertiser pretty prominently back in 1890. Now, just a little bit, you can certainly Google this, because there's a lot of information about the McKinley tariffs, especially now on the internet. But in 1890, McKinley tariffs. Now, McKinley was not president yet; he was a member of Congress, but he pushed forward this idea of a tariff, and a tariff as high as 50% on goods coming into the United States. And what's very interesting is some of the arguments that were being discussed in 1890 between the Republicans, McKinley being among them, and the Democrats, are the same exact arguments that we're hearing today. Whether tariffs will do any good by raising the tariffs that high on foreign countries, protecting our own industry. Now remember, this is the Industrial Revolution had occurred in the 1800s, and a lot more industries were here in the United States, and our ability to transport those goods from one country to another were rapidly increasing. A lot of small towns like East Aurora had the railroad, so transporting goods out of your small community into the bigger cities, into the ports, became a lot easier. East Aurora, right after the Civil War, got a railroad. 1890s West Falls, the railroad went through the little hamlet of West Falls. So a lot of towns were getting these railroads. So the ability to move goods and trade goods with other countries became much more universal in even small towns. So we had a cheese factory here in East Aurora. There's a pickle factory in West Falls. There were brickyards, and a lot of those things, those products stayed local, but a lot could also be transported, and especially the cheese. The cheese market was a big deal. We had dairy farms in our community, so people would be paying attention to here in East Aurora. They would be paying attention to what was happening in Washington, D.C. So the McKinley Tariff is enacted in the fall of 1890. And William McKinley, member of Congress, was behind it. And it did put a tariff of up to 50% on a lot of products. Well, what happened is people started to panic. What I found amazing is there were segments of the population, some businesses that were pushing consumers to stock up before the tariffs took effect. And we were hearing that in the news this last week of whether or not we should buy a bunch of products. Stores, businesses were stockpiling as much of the product as they could in order to be able to sell it at the lower price even after the tariffs went into effect. You saw that on CBS, CNN. They did news stories about this. The New York Times did news stories about this here in 2025 in regard to Trump's tariffs. October, November of 1890, the exact same thing was happening, maybe on a smaller scale here in East Aurora. But we had, just going through the East Aurora Advertiser, there were some advertisements. The F. Henry Fuller store, which was Mr. Fuller was a prominent local businessman here in East Aurora. His store was located where Rookie's Bar is today. And there was called the People's Store, which was located right across the street in what was known as the Persons Block. They both placed giant ads in the East Aurora Advertiser, and by giant I mean the lettering was big, with the word tariffs in it. And both stores were trying to get customers to come in and promising that they had cheaper prices because they had stockpiled women's handkerchiefs and other items that were imported. Jewelry stores said that they had bought a bunch of jewelry or the materials for the jewelry before the tariffs had gone into place, so that they could promise lower prices than their competitors who were under the tariff. Under the tariff. So whether this was true or not is very interesting, because there were also throughout history, as you read articles that claim that these businesses, and this is the claim today, I just heard it on the news today and it makes sense, that even if something was made locally, the price of them just goes up, because if they're charging a tariff to import, even something produced here, it would become the new price. So they could raise their price even if it was produced locally, or they had imported it before the tariff went into effect in order to get more money. That was one argument. The critics are saying that the businesses were taking advantage of their customers. So they could still offer a lower price than the tariff, but still a higher price than what they ordinarily would have done. It was like a little game they were playing to get more money. And in fact, some businesses were actually putting in their ads in the prices, the original price and the tariff price. They wanted the customers to know how much the tariff, and these were small businesses here in East Aurora, Main Street businesses. They wanted to know how much that tariff was impacting the price of their goods. Now, that's hard to calculate sometimes, because the price is built in. There's not a tariff tax that's added on when you get the bill, but they did that in the ads to try to tell folks, well, this is not all on the store. This is a tariff tax that's added on. And a similar thing is happening today, almost identical is happening today in 2025 as was happening in 1890. Now, so the McKinley tariffs in place in 1890, and these local stores were reacting to it. There was concern. There was concern. You see it in the articles. I have to do a lot more research into it. I've only had a day to research this, not even. So I am planning to write more about it. Again, I don't think this tariff issue is going to go away. And research how it impacted our local lumber market. A lot of the lumber stayed local, but the cheese market, the Richardson Beebe Cheese Company, a very large cheese company here, right at that time, 1890s, 1880s, 1890s, was sending cheese all over the place. Dairy farms around here would produce, and they would convert it to cheese at a bunch of places. Every little community around East Aurora had its own cheese factory, and then they would, on Elm Street was the headquarters, the Richardson Beebe. I'd just be interested to see how that, I'm going to dig right into the numbers to see what the impact might have been on the export of that cheese, because the word reciprocal tariffs appears in the Easter Advertiser and in newspapers too. So that's not a new term. We would have imposed tariffs on other countries, and those other countries would have imposed tariffs on us. And so just the impact on our local industry. Again, we had lumber yards, we had a cheese factory. The cheese market probably would have been the most impacted, the most interesting to look at, because it was such a big deal. They actually put the cheese market, the cheese numbers, on the front page of the Easter Advertiser week after week. It was such an important part of our local economy. A lot of people were employed at the Richardson Beebe cheese factories. And so that was a huge part of our economy at the time. So I'd be interested to see that. So stay tuned on that. I'll probably write something for either an article for my monthly newspaper column or for a book that's upcoming. But so 1890, well, the 1894, these tariffs, the McKinley tariffs, were really unpopular with everyday folks. Same concept as today. Prices were going up. Your everyday Americans, your small town folks were not happy with this, and it actually became an issue in the elections, and the Democrats actually won all branches of the government, the Congress and the presidency, and so they were the tariffs that McKinley had put into place. They were actually pulled back in what was known as the Wilson-Gorman tariffs of 1894, which reduced those tariffs. What's fascinating is in 1894, right around the time that those tariff reductions were put into place, more ads appeared in the Easter Advertiser from local businesses, including Mr. Fuller's store, the F. Henry Fuller store. And they were encouraging people to come into the store and take advantage of the lower prices because the tariffs had gone down, and so that they could reduce their prices. Again, they used it as a marketing tool, at least, and probably it was true that they could reduce the prices because they were paying less. There was not that high of a tax on the products coming in to their store. And that they could offer those products at a lower price. What was very interesting is the stores were saying, if you want imported goods, imported items, handkerchiefs and clothing, were seen as really higher end, more special. And so the stores were saying, you know, when the tariffs were first put in, we stockpiled these things, and you can still get the imported goods, the high quality German fabrics, things like that. And of course, this was before World War I, and they were promoting that if you could still get these products at a reasonable price because they had stockpiled. And then when those tariffs were reduced, they did the same thing. They said, now we can offer these. They're being imported at a lower rate, so we're going to pass that rate along to you. So that was one of the benefits of the reduced tariff in 1894. 1897 comes along. McKinley's elected president, and actually there's a big deal about whether it was a referendum on tariffs, and McKinley put in new tariffs And in 1897, more tariffs came along. And again, the advertisements came in the paper again, and the news articles. At that point, there were also more news articles about it. And one of the biggest things I noticed at that time, when the tariffs went up again, was the Peak Lumber Mill, which was located where King Street and Oakwood Avenue, which is where the Oakwood Plaza is today. They put notices in the paper, explanations, basically saying before the tariffs go into place, buy your roof shingles, because those are the things we think are going to raise the price, because some of the maybe the product itself wasn't made in the United States, but the things that the elements, the materials that go into creating these products might have been imported, and then that affects the price. Again, it's really crazy how the language is exactly the same that we're hearing today on the news as to how the tariffs are affecting us. So that was one of the impacts of a tariff in 1897 was roof shingles, and people building their houses would pay more for that product. And they were saying the same today of appliances and things like that. What I also found interesting is that we have this idea today, I think, that we import a lot more stuff today than we did back then. And it is true, we do, appliances, things like that, cell phone parts, all those. But we have this, we were still very reliant on foreign goods back in the 1890s. And one of the arguments you saw in the paper is that, the tariffs are meant to boost production of materials here. And people were making the point in the 1890s that we don't have the ability to produce everything here in the United States, and that there needed to be a balance. And so by putting a tariff on certain products, or blanket tariffs, and that's what's happening now, is blanket tariffs on countries, not necessarily specific products, raises the price of those products because we don't produce them here. I mean, we don't produce certain bananas, things like that aren't produced in the United States, so we're not protecting the American banana market. And that was the same argument back then. So it's really interesting to see how the argument hasn't changed over tariffs. The one difference I did notice, and you'll hear this quite a bit, is that Trump's tariffs today, he is putting in place under an emergency. He's basically declaring an emergency and taking on that role as an executive power. And there's a debate now of whether Congress should step in and take that power back from him. The previous tariffs were congressional. They were laws. They were put in place by Congress with the president, working with the president. And so people had more time. And I noticed that the up-down of the tariffs, you'd have a tariff put in place, then it was reduced back, and reduced, occurred over years, not days. So that's a little bit of the difference, why there's some issues with the impact of the Trump tariffs today versus the ones in the 1890s, is because of the timing. It took a couple years for the cycle of up-down tariffs in some cases back then, where today it's within hours even, and days. So the 1890 tariffs were the big one that I was able to find things about. But throughout history, tariffs have been mentioned in the paper and their impact on local communities. 1960s, there was discussion about tariffs on steel products to help preserve the steel industry in the United States. And the impact locally was we had a lot of people in the East Aurora area working at the Lackawanna steel mills, steel factories. And so it was a discussion that was important to our local community, because a lot of people here worked in that industry here in Western New York. And in the 1930s, there was a lot of, you had heard during the Great Depression, there were tariff issues. That was coming up in the East Aurora Advertiser quite a bit. The League of Women Voters was actually quite on the forefront of this. They would hold guest speakers, and they would talk on the issues of the tariffs. They would come out with statements to try to get the public to understand them. And again, I thought that was interesting because tariffs can be complicated, and the arguments surrounding them can be complicated and misconstrued. Today, you see people's heads, we're having enough laymen, people, normal, regular people like me, might struggle to try to figure out what the impact of tariffs are, what they're trying to accomplish, what they have accomplished in the past. And the League of Women Voters would hold meetings in people's houses and at the local library to talk about tariffs, and they'd bring speakers in. This would be in the 1930s and later even. So I thought that was quite interesting that there was this effort to educate people on what this tariff controversy was all about and whether or not we needed tariffs. And of course, in the 1890s, the tariffs were brought in an effort to raise revenue, but also protect industry here at home. And whether or not that was effective was up for debate. And in fact, it kept going back and forth as to whether or not the average American benefited from tariffs. And in the 1890 McKinley tariff, they determined there was a big political backlash to them, similar to what's happening right now. Your main streets, your local, your regular everyday folks, there's a lot of seemingly backlash to the tariffs and how it's impacting retirement accounts and the price of goods, the inflation, inflationary pricing of goods that because of tariffs was happening in 1890 as well. So this was happening throughout history, and it's not a new thing. So I hope that helps put the tariff issue in context. It's happened before, maybe not in the same way. Excuse me. Maybe not in the same way, but has happened before, and it has impacted Main Street of East Aurora and small towns across the country just as much as it's affecting Wall Street. So a little context. And we will see what happens, but previous tariffs to this extent have not worked out so well. But we will see what happens to the Trump tariffs that are currently being debated. Again, thank you for joining me for our weekly chat about local history. I am Robert Lowell Goller. I am the Town and Village Historian, but these videos and a lot of my research are not officially connected to my duties as Town and Village Historian. If you have a topic idea, as always, place it in the comments or send me a private message. And as always, thanks for joining me, and we'll see you next time. Take care.